All right, so for those of you who are following along, this the last video I did, I left off the night, the night that the Lord saved me, and I don't remember how late I stayed up that night, but I remember sitting in my dad's recliner and reading his Bible um, until I went to bed. Now I woke up the next day, and of course I went back to work. I don't know if I told you guys, but I worked at a yacht manufacturing plant, and it was called Bayliner, and I used to make Bayliner boats. It was a factory. It used to exist here in Valdosta years ago. Anyway, I had a job working there, and when the Lord saved me, I was there. In fact, it was a gentleman that interviewed me for a job that had shared the gospel with me. One of the last people that had shared, or rather had shared his testimony with me before I got saved. But so I got up the next morning, I went back to work, and I walked in, and there was this black man, and his name was Frank. And he was quite a bit my senior. He was, well, I'll say quite a bit. He was probably 10, maybe 20 years older than me. I'm not sure. But anyway, when I got to work that day, he came back to my station where I worked at, and he walked up and he looked at me. Now, something I don't think I remember, I don't remember if I told you this before, but I had really long hair up until about 3 days before I got saved. I was in the process of trying to clean up my act, so I had really long hair. I had a beard that was like really thick. I looked like one of the guys from Duck Dynasty. And I was just sick of myself. I was sick of everything about my life. And I was trying before I got saved to clean up my own act. And I thought, you know what, maybe a lot of the sermons and Christians that I had met prior to me coming to faith in Christ like to focus on that, like you need to get a haircut, like that's going to save you, or you need to cut a bit. There's a big percentage of, especially in the independent Baptist movement, who for some reason they feel like it's an abomination to have a beard. In fact, I've even heard guys preach against having beards, and we're not even going to get off on that nonsense, but I have heard it. But in my mind, I thought, man, if I just, shave my beard, cut my long hair, that'll help me clean up my act, and maybe I can be. Anyway, so I did that. I went in my mom's bathroom, and I asked her, I said, because I didn't own a razor, scissors. I told you the only thing I had in my house was like a Bible and a shot glass that I couldn't find, and that was about it. Um, I didn't even have a razor or a pair of scissors. So I went over to my mother's house. I put my hair up in a ponytail, and I asked my mom for scissors. And she brought me a pair of scissors. She didn't ask me what I wanted with them, and she had no idea what I was about to do. So I cut my long hair off. I cut my beard off. And then I think it took 3 of those Gillette disposable razors. It might not have been Gillette, but you know what I'm talking about, the disposable razor. So like 3 of those. I got my beard cut short enough with scissors, and I ended up shaving it off. I walked out of the bathroom that night, and honestly, my mom thought, I don't think she knew who I was. It startled her at first. I had to actually speak for her to hear my voice, I think, to realize who I was. But anyway, I'd gone to work, and they had seen me that day with short hair and no beard shave. But the next day, the day after I got saved, this black gentleman by the name of Frank Lesters, he walked up to me, and he was just like, he was looking at me funny. And he was kind of grinning. He was just one of these kind of guys. He walked up, he's looking at me, and he's kind of walking up close to me. And I'm thinking, what is this bird? What is his deal, And he walks up to me smiling. He goes, all right, tell me what happened to you. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, tell me what happened to you. He's just grinning from ear to ear. He's smiling. He goes, you ain't the same. Something's different about you. And I just, it was like our introduction to each other. And he and I met And I told him the best I could. I didn't know any kind of theological language. I didn't know how to say what happened to me. I really didn't know how to say it. I was just like, I don't even know. And he knew. He knew. Now, this guy, Frank Lester's, he was a Christian. And he was an outlaw, man. I mean, before he got saved, he was into drugs. He was drug dealing. He was into, all kind of stuff. And he told me, he said he'd been arrested so many times. They had a uniform out at our local county jail that they had reserved with his name on it because he would get arrested so many times they just give him the same uniform. He was a jail minister. Now, he actually went back into the jails that he preached. So he knew he had already been through what I had gone through, and he saw the difference and he recognized it immediately and wanted to come over. He and I ended up becoming really good friends, and I love this brother. I learned so much. Oh man, so much. He was probably one of the wisest men that I've ever known, hands down. Probably one of the wisest men. He shared so much wisdom with me throughout our friendship, and he had a great sense of humor, and I love that because I'm quite the jokester, and I loved that he had a good sense of humor. And because before I got saved, I thought Christians were boring, man. Most of y'all look like, I ain't got to tell you. So to find a man who had experienced what I had, and he had this just brimming with joy, I really liked. So that night, I got home and I called. I believe it was on a Thursday night. Now, granted, this has been many, many years ago. It was 1996, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was 96. The older you get, sometimes these things get cloudy, but I'm pretty sure it was a Thursday night. I got home from work. I didn't know anything about denominations, churches. I mean, if it had not have been maybe for the hand of God directing me somewhat, I could have ended up in a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness church. I knew nothing about any of them. So I ended up going home. I just opened the phone book to the Yellow Pages. You guys remember back when we used to have Yellow Pages. Looked up churches. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to get involved in a church because I thought that's what you do. Something like this happens to you. I need to start going to church. And that's what everybody always told me, you need to get in church, get your life cleaned up. Well, Jesus Christ had already saved me. So my thing was, I got to get in church. It was just what I thought was expected. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what to look for. So I opened up Yellow Pages. I found this church, and it was Bemis Road Baptist Church. And I thought, okay, I've heard of Baptist churches. Think that maybe that's not a cult. So I called the number, and this gentleman answered the phone, and he said, hello. And I'm like, what do I say? What do I tell this man? In my head, I'm like, I don't know what to tell him. So I just said, sir, I need to, talk to somebody about what I need to do. I didn't know what you had to do. I didn't know how you join a church. I did not know any of that. So anyway, I'm talking to this guy, and he starts asking me questions, and I began to explain to him a little bit about what happened. And all of a sudden, this gentleman said to me, he goes, young man, you got saved, didn't you? I'd never heard that. I had never heard that terminology, you got saved. Not in that way. I mean, like if you jumped into the river and couldn't swim, I'd heard somebody save me. But at that moment, when he asked me that question, everything in me made me realize that there was probably no other word that I could think of that better described what had happened to me. Because I thought my life was, right there on the verge of destruction, and then Christ. I said, yes, sir, I think that sounds about like a good description of what happened to me. He said, well, I'll tell you what, it's visitation tonight. I got some gentlemen going on visitation. Give me your address, and I'll have somebody come over and meet you. So I said, okay. So that night, there was two gentlemen showed up at my house from this church. And if you watch some of my older videos, I've talked about this a little bit about what transpired that night. I didn't know anything about religion, and I'll tell you one story that was very, very humorous in a moment, but I got some other things. They came over. We sat down, and directly in front of me sat a young man who introduced himself as the assistant or the associate pastor of the church. And over to my right was a guy who, was just a church member. In theological terms or whatever, you'd call him a layman. Or in institutional religious system terminology, he was the layman. This guy was the professional clergyman. Now, I didn't know none of that back then. All I knew is this is a preacher and this is a guy that came with him. That was about the extent of my knowledge. But I can tell you, I felt very, very uncomfortable with this preacher. Very uncomfortable. There was just something about him that didn't sit well with me. Now, because I was pretty street savvy, I mean, most of my friends were musicians, outlaw bikers, drug dealers. I felt that I was pretty street savvy. I could smell a rat. But it wasn't that. This was something different. It was something that made me uneasy, but it wasn't like that. But the other guy, I felt like an instant kindred, like me and this guy had been pals all our life. And there's a significance to what I'm telling you. Although I didn't know it at the time, it would later be revealed to me. But I had no idea what was going on. But as we talked, there was something in me that made me cautious about this preacher. But I didn't say anything to anybody. I kept it to myself because, again, I'm young. I'm a babe in Christ. I am literally 24 hours after being born again, and I don't know nothing about anything. Which brings me to my funny story. So the guy was telling me that I had to be baptized. And I said, okay, what is that? And he said, now that you're saved, he said, it's baptism. And he explained to me, it represents the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We put you in this tub, and we put you under the water, and we bring you back up and everything. And he goes, we'll do this in front of the congregation, everything. And I stopped him. I said, wait. This is in a bathtub? And he said, yeah. And you do this in front of people? Yeah. People watching me do this? Yeah. And in my mind's reeling because I'm thinking, and I was dead serious. It's funny now, but I was serious. I said, no, man, I'm not getting up in front of a bunch of people and getting in the tub in front of with people watching. I don't want to do that. That's embarrassing. And he looked at me, and he looked at the other guy, and he said, you know something? It's amazing this guy grew up in the Bible Belt. And the young man who was a layman, I never forget what he said. He said, you know what? That shows how much a failure as a church we have been when we have people in our community that are this ignorant of the things of God. And it kind of offended me a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute, man, why I got to be like I'm ignorant? Just because I don't want to get naked in front of a bunch of people in a bathtub, I don't know. I'm more modest than that. And the guy laughed, and he said, you don't got to be naked. He said, you do this with your clothes on. And I said, okay. And I just thought, I was like, man, I had this desire. I want to follow Christ. That just it didn't sound right to me. But when he told me you could do it with your clothes on, he's like, every Christian does it. Even Jesus got baptized. And he gave me this little pamphlet that told me about baptism and said to read up on it. And I did. And so, I thought, okay, I mean, if this is part of my new life, I'm gonna do it. I had no idea what baptism was, and they thought that was funny. They really did. The guy said, I would be. He said, it I could tell by the look on your face you were dead serious. You weren't pulling my leg. You weren't kidding. I said, no, I really was serious. I was not going to get naked and take a bath in front of no congregation of people. But anyway, so that was my introduction to the religious system. That following Sunday morning, I ended up going to church, and I met the man who I spoke to on the phone, the elderly man. And he was the pastor of the church at that time. His name was Billy Cashwell. And he met me, and he took a special interest, I guess, in me because of my testimony. I was pretty much immediately kind of, I guess, brought, he got to know me. He took the time he spent time with me and got to know me. That man helped me out to this day. I'm very thankful for him. I'm not a big fan of the institutional church system, but I do recognize the fact that there are people in that system, and I've always said there are people in that system that are godly people, and I just he's one of those people, man. I just absolutely admire him. But anyway, I got into that system. He asked me, he's like, when do you want to be baptized? And I was like, well, I'd really like to wait. I mean, I've got some things going on, man. I'd like to get some things straight. So, at a more convenient time, I'll get baptized. And he said, okay, all right, well, just let me know when you're ready. And I turned around and I was walking back out, and it was like immediately this thought came into my mind that said, are you going to follow me? Are you going to be obedient if I ask something of you? And yeah. Well, the first thing I ask of you is to be baptized. So I turned around, I went back, and I told him, I said, I'm going to get baptized tonight. Can you do it tonight? He said, we can do it tonight at the night service. So I went, and I got baptized. I had two people. There were people I wanted to show up. I mean, there were some people that I wanted to show up. I thought all my friends was going to be excited for me. I told you I was naive. Anyway, the only person that showed up was one of my aunts who had, unbeknownst to me, prayed for me for years, and one of my uncles who had never, I don't know if, I won't say he prayed for me, he didn't, but he always come to bond me out of jail. I will tell you that. He was always there when I was in trouble. He never criticized me. He never put me down. He never told me what a sorry piece of work I was. If I needed bail, he'd come and bail me out of jail. He was a faithful, it just was. But he never put me down, but he was so excited when I told him I got saved. And probably because he knew he wasn't going to have to spend no more money on me. But no, but he came. He was so excited when I told him. I remember he literally threw both of his hands up in the air and shouted and was like, yes, I will be there. So he came. No one else but that aunt and that uncle actually came. I was baptized that night, and I was on my way, man. I was on my way to becoming something. Again, I didn't know. It was one baby step at a time. I'm reading scripture, but God, bear with me. Ooh, sorry about that. I'm back. Man, this thought just occurred to me that I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know where I was headed, but in place, God had already put this elderly black minister, Frank. He had put him in my life at work. He had placed me at a job where I had the freedom to talk to this man at length. There were some other believers there that I ended up getting to know that were very encouraging. He gave me a pastor, of a church that took a lot of interest in me. And I was somewhat of I don't know, like an object, I guess. Like people kind of heard about my past. I had one lady, she came up to me one time. It's kind of funny. She said, I'd heard people like you could get saved, but I've never seen it. I've never seen God save anybody come out of your background. And I just thought, well, I'm glad he did. Um, but right then, the world, man, I mean, the sky was brighter. The birds sang. You notice things after God saves you that you never noticed before. You never noticed how beautiful creation is. You never notice how pretty the sky. You never notice how awesome the birds. It it's really like you can see and hear things for the very first time. And I was walking in this, but I still didn't trust that pastor. I'll tell you guys about that later on. There's a reason for that. Appreciate you guys watching. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great day.